Growing up with two daughters, my parents always made it crystal clear who their favorite was. While my sister Madison basked in their endless praise and attention, I lived in her shadow, watching from the sidelines as they celebrated her every move. For 28 years, I accepted my role as the forgotten daughter, the one they only noticed when they needed something fixed or paid for. But recently, something shifted, and for the first time ever, my parents are panicking about losing me. Before we dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button if you have ever felt overlooked in your own family, and do not forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about family dynamics. Have you ever been the responsible child who got taken for granted? Share your experience in the comments below, because today's story might feel surprisingly familiar. I always told myself that being the older sister meant taking the back seat. When Madison was born 3 years after me, I convinced my 5-year-old self that babies needed more attention. Our house in the suburbs of Denver looked picture perfect, from the outside white picket fence, manicured lawn, and two parents who seemed to have it all together. Dad worked as an engineer for an aerospace company, and Mom taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. They appeared to be the ideal middle-class American family, but inside those walls, the dynamics were far from balanced. Madison came into this world like a ray of sunshine, according to everyone who met her. She had these big blue eyes and blonde curls that bounced when she walked. Even as a toddler, she could charm anyone with her infectious giggle and outgoing personality. Meanwhile, I was the serious child who preferred books to people who earned straight A's, but never quite knew how to work a room like my little sister did. The differences became glaringly obvious during our birthday celebrations. When I turned 10, Mom organized a small gathering with 3 friends from school. We had a simple chocolate cake from the grocery store, and I received a few books and some practical clothes for the new school year. I remember feeling grateful for the celebration, thinking it was perfectly nice. But when Madison turned 7 that same year, our living room transformed into a carnival. 30 children filled our house, complete with a bounty castle in the backyard, a professional clown, and a 3-tier princess cake that cost more than my entire birthday budget. I found myself making excuses for the disparity. Madison was younger, more social, and clearly needed these big celebrations to feel loved. I was fine with quiet moments, I told myself. I did not need all that fanfare. This became my internal mantra whenever the favoritism stung a little too much. School became my sanctuary and my battleground simultaneously. I threw myself into academics with the determination of someone trying to prove their worth. By high school, I was valedictorian president of the debate team and recipient of multiple academic awards. The day I received a full scholarship to the University of Colorado Boulder. I burst through the front door with the acceptance letter, my heart racing with excitement. I found my parents in the kitchen, and when I shared the news, Dad looked up from his newspaper and said, "That is great, sweetheart, very practical choice." Mom nodded approvingly and added, "You always were our responsible one." Before I could bask in their acknowledgement, Madison bounded down the stairs, fresh from a date with her high school boyfriend. Immediately, their attention shifted to her as they peppered her with questions about her evening, her dress, and whether the boy treated her well. My scholarship letter lay forgotten on the kitchen counter as they hung on every word of her teenage romance. Standing there in that moment, watching my parents light up for Madison while my achievement became background noise, I felt something crack inside my chest. But I pushed the feeling down, telling myself that academic success was its own reward. I did not need external validation to know I was doing well. I was building a future for myself, and that had to be enough. College offered me the first taste of what life could be like when people valued my contributions. Professors appreciated my analytical mind, classmates respected my insights, and I discovered that I actually had quite a bit to offer when given the chance. I studied finance with laser focus, graduating summa cum laude and landing a position at a prestigious firm in downtown Denver right after graduation. By 25, I had carved out a successful career as a financial analyst, earning a salary that allowed me to live comfortably in a nice apartment and save for my future. I worked long hours, managed complex portfolios, and earned the respect of my colleagues and clients. My life felt stable and purposeful in ways that my childhood never had. Meanwhile, Madison was struggling to find her footing after dropping out of college during her sophomore year. She had enrolled in communications at a local university, but found the coursework uninspiring and the professors too demanding. After 2 years of mediocre grades and frequent complaints about how boring her classes were, she decided that traditional education was not for her. Instead, she wanted to explore her creative side and discover her true passion. This announcement was met with enthusiastic support from our parents, who assured her that taking time to find herself was perfectly natural and healthy. Madison cycled through jobs like seasons changing. She tried retail at an upscale boutique, but found standing all day too exhausting. She worked as a barista at a trendy coffee shop, but quit after 3 weeks because the customers were too demanding. She attempted freelance graphic design despite having no formal training, but clients kept rejecting her work. Each time she left a job, she moved back home, and each time she ran out of money, she turned to our parents for financial support. Their responses to our respective situations could not have been more different. When I mentioned working late to close an important deal, Mom would frown and lecture me about work-life balance. "You are going to burn yourself out, Caroline. Money is not everything. You need to make time for fun and relationships." Her concern felt more like criticism than caring, as if my dedication to my career was somehow problematic. But when Madison showed up at Sunday dinner with tales of quitting yet another job, Dad would pat her shoulder and say, "Our little girl is an artist at heart. She just needs to find the right outlet for her creativity." Mom would nod enthusiastically and add, "Madison has such a special spirit. She cannot be confined to just any ordinary job." The financial disparity became impossible to ignore during family gatherings. I had been financially independent since college graduation, never once asking for help with rent, car payments, or any other expenses. I took pride in my self-sufficiency and never wanted to burden anyone with my responsibilities. Madison, however, seemed to have an endless safety net. When her credit card debt mounted to over $8,000 from shopping sprees and dining out, our parents paid it off without hesitation. When her car broke down because she never maintained it properly, they bought her a newer model. When she decided to take an expensive photography course to find her artistic voice, they covered the tuition. Christmas mornings highlighted these differences in painful detail. My gifts were always practical, nice sweaters for work, organizational planners, gift cards to stores where I could buy necessities. Madison's presents looked like a spread from a luxury magazine designer handbags, expensive jewelry, electronics she'd casually mentioned wanting. One year, I received a cookbook and a set of storage containers, while Madison unwrapped a $1,000 camera and a weekend trip to a spa resort. The relationship dynamics were equally revealing. I had been dating David, a thoughtful architect, who shared my love for hiking and quiet evenings at home for over a year before I introduced him to my parents. When I brought him to Sunday dinner, they asked polite but superficial questions about his work and then largely ignored him for the rest of the evening. They never invited him to family events or made any effort to include him in their lives. Madison, meanwhile, had been dating Jake, an aspiring musician who had been working on his demo for 3 years while living in his friend's garage. Jake was charming and funny, but he had no steady income, no clear career goals, and a habit of borrowing money from Madison that he never repaid. Despite these red flags, my parents adored him. They invited him to every family gathering, asked about his music career with genuine interest, and even referred to him as their future son-in-law. Dad would spend entire evenings discussing music theory with Jake, while Mom fussed over whether he was eating enough. The breaking point came when I realized that I was not just being overlooked, I was actively being taken for granted. Every family crisis fell on my shoulders by default. When my grandmother needed help navigating her insurance after a hospital stay, I spent weeks on the phone with representatives and drove her to countless appointments. When the roof leaked at my parents' house, they called me to research contractors and coordinate repairs. When Madison needed someone to co-sign for an apartment lease because her credit was poor, they voluntarily offered my name without even asking me first. I began to feel like a background character in my own family story, valuable only for my ability to solve problems and provide financial stability. The realization hit me during Madison's 25th birthday party, another elaborate affair with dozens of guests and expensive decorations. I watched from the corner as my parents beamed with pride, taking photos and making toasts about their special girl. Nobody mentioned that I had paid for half the party expenses when they ran over budget. Nobody acknowledged that I had spent my weekend helping set up and would spend my Sunday cleaning up. Standing there invisible in my own family's celebration, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to buy my own house and create some distance from the dynamics that had defined my entire life. I deserved to live somewhere I was appreciated, even if that meant living alone. I started house hunting in secret browsing listings during my lunch breaks and scheduling viewings for evenings when I claimed to be working late. I found a beautiful 2-bedroom house about 40 minutes from my parents' neighborhood, with a big backyard and a home office where I could work in peace. The mortgage payment was easily manageable with my salary, and I had saved enough for a substantial down payment. The discovery happened by accident, which somehow made it even more jarring. I had left my laptop open on my parents' kitchen table during a Sunday dinner, and when Dad needed to look something up, he casually opened my browser. There in plain sight were tabs for real estate websites, mortgage calculators, and moving company reviews. The room fell silent as my parents processed what they were seeing. "Caroline, what is all this?" Mom asked, her voice higher than usual as she peered over Dad's shoulder at the screen. I felt my stomach drop, but there was no point in lying. "I am looking at houses. I think it is time for me to have my own place." The reaction was immediate and intense. Dad's face went pale as he scrolled through the listings I had bookmarked. Mom started firing questions at me like I was being interrogated. Where was I planning to move? Why had I not discussed this with them? Did I not realize how this would affect the family? You cannot just leave. Madison chimed in from the living room, abandoning her phone to join the conversation. "What about Sunday dinners? What about holidays? You are going to break up our family over what, some silly grudge?" For the first time in my life, I saw genuine panic in my parents' eyes, but it was not the kind of panic that comes from worrying about losing someone you love. It was the panic of realizing that your safety net was about to disappear. In that moment, I understood something that had taken me 28 years to figure out. They were not upset about losing me. They were upset about losing what I provided. The next few days were a whirlwind of phone calls, unexpected visits, and emotional manipulation disguised as concern. Mom showed up at my apartment on a Tuesday evening with a casserole and red-rimmed eyes, claiming she had been unable to sleep since learning about my plans. "We have always been such a close family," she said, settling onto my couch without being invited. "I do not understand why you want to destroy that." Dad tried a different approach, appearing at my office on Wednesday afternoon to take me to lunch. Over sandwiches, he explained how proud they were of my success and how much they depended on my level head during family decisions. "Madison is still figuring things out," he said, as if she were 19 instead of 25. "She needs her big sister's guidance. You cannot abandon her now." But it was Madison's visit that revealed the true depth of the problem. She arrived at my apartment on Thursday evening, tears streaming down her face, clutching a bottle of wine like a peace offering. "I do not understand why you are being so selfish," she sobbed. "We are family. Family sticks together. You are going to destroy everything Mom and Dad built just because you are jealous of me." The word jealous hit me like a slap. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw a 25-year-old woman who had never been held accountable for her choices, never been required to stand on her own 2 feet, and never been asked to consider how her actions affected other people. She genuinely believed that I was the problem, that my desire for independence was somehow an attack on her. "Madison," I said quietly, "when is the last time you asked how I was doing?" She blinked at me, clearly confused by the question. "What do you mean? You are always fine. You have your job, your boyfriend, Your apartment. You have everything figured out. When is the last time Mom and Dad came to see my apartment? When is the last time they asked about my work, my goals, my life outside of what I can do for this family? She stared at me blankly, and I realized she had never considered these questions because she had never had to. Her entire world revolved around her needs, her dreams, her problems. The possibility that I might have needs too had simply never occurred to her. That weekend, all four of us ended up in my parents' living room for what they called a family meeting, but felt more like an intervention. I sat across from three people who claimed to love me, watching them take turns, explaining why I was wrong to want independence. They offered compromises that were not really compromises. I could keep looking at houses, but should stay within 10 minutes of their neighborhood. I could move out, but should commit to having dinner with them at least 3 times a week. I could have my own space, but should always be available for family emergencies. As I listened to their negotiation tactics, something crystallized in my mind. For the first time in my life, I had leverage, and they were terrified of losing it. They were not fighting for me. They were fighting to keep their safety net intact. Madison needed someone to bail her out of her poor decisions. Mom and Dad needed someone to handle the complicated, time-consuming aspects of adult life that they had grown accustomed to delegating to me. "I have a proposition," I said, cutting through their discussion. "For the next 30 days, I want you to treat me the way you treat Madison. I want the same consideration, the same enthusiasm for my achievements, the same benefit of the doubt when I make mistakes. I want to be invited into conversations instead of being assigned tasks. I want my relationship and my career to be celebrated instead of criticized. If you can do that consistently for 1 month, I will consider staying in the area." The silence that followed was deafening. They looked at each other as if I had spoken in a foreign language. Finally, Dad cleared his throat and said, "We've always treated you girls equally. You are being dramatic." And there it was. Even faced with the possibility of losing me, they could not acknowledge the obvious disparity in how they treated their daughters. They were so invested in the narrative of being fair, loving parents that they could not see the reality of their favoritism. "I am giving you 30 days, I repeated, "starting now. If nothing changes, I am buying the house and moving forward with my life." The month that followed was a masterclass in performative parenting. Within the first week, I received more phone calls from my parents than I had gotten in the previous 6 months combined. Mom started texting me daily with messages like, "Hope you are having a wonderful day at work," and "thinking of you." Dad sent me articles about financial planning and investment strategies, subjects he had never shown interest in discussing with me before. They invited David to dinner and made an elaborate effort to include him in conversation, asking detailed questions about his projects and complimenting his insights. For one evening, I almost believed they were genuinely trying to change, but the performance felt hollow, like actors reading lines they did not fully understand. The most telling moment came when I received an unexpected promotion at work. My supervisor called me into his office on a Tuesday afternoon to tell me I was being promoted to senior analyst with a significant salary increase and management responsibilities. I was thrilled and called my parents immediately to share the news. "That is wonderful, honey," Mom exclaimed with an enthusiasm that sounded slightly forced. "We should celebrate. Why did not we take you and David out to dinner this weekend?" It was exactly what I had been asking for, the kind of recognition and celebration that Madison received for far smaller achievements. But something felt wrong about it. The timing was too convenient, the enthusiasm too calculated. They were going through the motions without understanding the spirit of what I needed. Meanwhile, Madison was struggling without her usual safety net. When her credit card was declined at a restaurant, she called our parents expecting them to handle it, but they suggested she call me instead. When her car needed repairs, they recommended she research mechanics herself instead of immediately offering to pay. For the first time in her adult life, she was being asked to solve her own problems. The facade cracked during the 3rd week when Madison showed up at my apartment in tears. Jake had broken up with her, and she had spent her rent money on a weekend trip trying to win him back. She was facing eviction and had nowhere else to turn. "I know Mom and Dad are trying to prove something to you," she said, mascara streaking down her cheeks, "but they are not helping me like they used to. Can you just lend me the money for rent? I promise I will pay you back." I looked at my sister. This 25-year-old woman who had never learned to budget, never faced real consequences for her choices, and never been required to plan ahead. Our parents had done her no favors by shielding her from reality, and I realized that continuing to enable her would only make things worse. "Madison, I have lent you money 4 times in the past 2 years," I said gently. "You have never paid any of it back. The total is over $15,000. I cannot keep being your backup plan." She stared at me in shock as if she had genuinely forgotten about the previous loans. "But you have money. You have a good job. I do not have anyone else." "That is exactly the problem," I replied. "You do not have anyone else because you have never needed anyone else. You have never had to build real relationships or develop real skills because you always knew someone would rescue you." By the end of the 30 days, it was clear that my parents were capable of changing their behavior temporarily, but they had not actually changed their perspective. The moment they thought I was satisfied, they started reverting to their old patterns. Madison received sympathy and excuses for her breakup, while my promotion was already old news. When my grandmother needed help with her medications, Mom automatically called me instead of asking Madison to help. The final straw came when Dad casually mentioned that they had co-signed for Madison's new apartment lease, despite everything that had happened during our trial month. They had learned nothing from the experience except how to manipulate me more effectively. I bought the house. The day I signed the closing papers, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief that I had never experienced before. I was grieving the family I had always hoped we could be, while celebrating the freedom to create the life I actually wanted. David helped me pack my apartment, and I was struck by how few personal items I owned that held happy memories with my family. Most of my meaningful possessions were connected to my education, my career, or my relationship with David. My parents were devastated, not because they would miss me, but because they were finally facing the consequences of their choices. Without me as their reliable safety net, they had to confront Madison's financial irresponsibility and their own inability to set boundaries with her. They also had to handle their own complicated adult tasks without having someone to delegate them to. Madison was forced to grow up almost overnight. Without my financial support and our parents' renewed caution about enabling her, she had to find steady employment and learn to manage her own life. It was painful to watch from a distance, but it was also necessary. David and I settled into our new home, which was everything I had dreamed it could be. I set up my home office overlooking the backyard and spent evenings reading on the deck instead of fielding phone calls about family crises. For the first time in my adult life, my weekends belonged to me. I started going to therapy to work through the complex emotions surrounding my decision. My therapist helped me understand that what I had experienced was a form of emotional neglect, where my needs were consistently deprioritized in favor of maintaining family stability. Learning to recognize my own worth outside of what I could provide for others was harder than I expected, but it was also liberating. Slowly, I began to rebuild relationships with extended family members who had witnessed the favoritism but had never known how to address it. My maternal Aunt Emma reached out after hearing about my move, sharing her own story of being the responsible daughter in a similar dynamic. Through her, I connected with cousins who had always respected my accomplishments, but had felt awkward bringing them up at family gatherings where Madison was the center of attention. The holidays were different that first year. Instead of spending Christmas morning watching Madison unwrap expensive gifts while I received practical items, David and I hosted dinner for my aunt, uncle, and their children. We started new traditions based on genuine connection rather than obligation. I cooked dishes I actually enjoyed instead of defaulting to Madison's preferences, and conversations centered around shared interests rather than one person's drama. My relationship with my parents eventually stabilized into something manageable but limited. They learned to appreciate my visits because they were no longer guaranteed. They began asking about my life instead of just updating me on Madison's latest crisis. It was not the close, loving relationship I had once hoped for, but it was honest in a way it had never been before. Madison and I developed a cautious friendship once she stopped expecting me to solve her problems. She eventually found steady work as a marketing coordinator and learned to manage her finances. Her relationship with our parents became more balanced when she was no longer their primary focus and they were no longer her primary source of support. She even thanked me years later for forcing her to become self-sufficient. Most importantly, I learned that walking away from unhealthy family dynamics is not giving up on love. It is choosing to love yourself enough to demand better. I discovered that my worth was not determined by how much I could provide for others or how many problems I could solve. I found peace in building a life based on mutual respect and genuine care rather than obligation and manipulation. The little girl who had convinced herself that being overlooked was normal grew into a woman who refused to accept crumbs of attention. I learned that true family is not about blood relations or shared history. It is about who shows up for you consistently, who celebrates your successes genuinely, and who supports your growth even when it is inconvenient for them. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who see your value the least. Walking away is not giving up, it is choosing yourself. And choosing yourself, I learned, is the most loving thing you can do for everyone involved. Have you ever felt like the forgotten child in your family? Have you experienced favoritism that made you question your own worth? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please share this video if it resonated with you, because someone in your life might need to hear that it is okay to choose themselves too. Do not forget to like this video if my story touched your heart, and subscribe for more real-life experiences about family dynamics and finding your own path. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that you deserve relationships that celebrate who you are, not just what you can provide. Until next time, choose yourself with courage and know that you are worthy of genuine love and respect.